Claude Hickman.
What's up, dude?
Dude, you're the only guy I know who has a Guinness Book World Record. Could you please talk about that?
Oh, yeah, man. It was like a bucket list thing, I guess. I watched the episode of Rob Dyrdek where he broke like 16 world records in one episode, and I was like, dude, I want to do this. Well, first of all, none of my friends understand the BMX stuff I do, and so if I told them, tricks or whatever, they'd be like, okay, whatever. But Guinness World Record was like something my old people friends could understand.
Yeah.
And I wanted something that was just like, and I wanted something BMX related. So I actually tried once. Were you there the first time I tried
No, I don't think
in
so.
Costa Mesa at the fairgrounds?
At Fairgrounds.
Well, I broke one, and you have to have all these witnesses and paperwork and all this
So
stuff.
who shows up? Like a guy in like a green hat shows up and is like
No,
taking
that's the
notes?
problem. If you pay for a Guinness World Record guy to actually show up, you can get one right then. If you want to do it the free way on your own, like the legit way, you have to have all this paperwork and witnesses. That's what is actually the hard part. Like even the one I did, I had to have an official like surveyor come survey the floor to make sure it was like not more than one.
Yeah, what'd you
10,000.
do? So what was your record?
So the one I found that I could beat, basically what you do is just like the Pharisees. You just lower the bar till you can do it. I found one I could do, which was rolling backwards on a bike, like longest distance rolling backwards on a bike. And the longest one was some dude from like Sweden who went like 50 feet. And so I was like, I did it one try. Yeah, I went like 150 feet.
That's
I get
awesome.
sandals. But yeah, I quit. I set a goal to do it before I turned 30,
Yeah.
and I didn't get it. And so for like 7 years, I just was like, shoot, And then I got kind of re-excited about it again. I think when I was like 36, 37.
So like anyone can set
You
like
can go
any
try.
record.
Well, you can submit ideas. A lot of times they're like, no, why don't you break an existing one? Like you can't just go out and
Yeah.
go, hey, I can do this special thing with my thumb, and so I'm the only one in the world that can do it. What they want you to do is like something that people have already done. So I submitted ideas and they said no.
Let's do one right now. Let's do like longest interview. Like a 14-week interview or something like that.
I'm serious. The hardest part was the paperwork. But yeah, I remember the day I got it. I mean, it was a lot of stuff to submit, and they take like 6-7 months to get back to you. And I totally remember whenever they emailed me, it was like, congratulations. I mean, it's still on the website right now. Like if you Google my name and
I look it up. So Claude Hickman, Guinness Book World Record, 150 feet flowing backward on a bike, riding backward on a bike.
Yeah, and
pretty cool.
literally like Neil Walker and like a lot of my old friends,
Yeah.
it was the first time they were like, "Hey, that's pretty cool," like have no idea what I've done, before that with BMX, which is obvious. Some of this is way harder, but then that made sense to them, and so now when I think it's just one of those things. A friend of mine says like people with interests are interesting people, and so now when people introduce me to speak, they're like, "Oh, he used to do BMX, and
Oh, yeah.
Guinness World Record," and everybody goes, "Oh, he must be
Your
awesome."
opener. Do people still know about Guinness records? You reference like old people
yeah.
know about it, but
Yeah. Somebody just did one the other day. I forgot what it was. I saw it. Anyway,
yeah, growing up, my brother had this like big book, and he just read through it, and it was the Guinness Book. It's like an actual book.
Yeah,
It's the Guinness Book of World
I
Records.
mean, some of them are pretty freaky, like longest fingernails and some crazy stuff, that you wouldn't want to do.
Those are the ones that have pictures in the book.
Yeah. I'm not in the book.
Yeah,
Out of the
picture.
10,000, there's like 1,000 they put in the book.
Oh yeah. Wow. So tell us more about Claude. Like obviously the BMX piece is a part of it, but tell us who you are and where you're from.
Man, it's funny because some people know me from our church here, because I teach at our church, and then some know me as the executive director of the traveling team, the ministry I lead, and then some people know me in the BMX world, and they don't know either of those other two things, or people know me at the church and don't know the other two. So I'm a weird little Venn diagram of things. Somebody called me a third culture kid, and I was like, oh, that actually helps me a lot more. You're a pastor's kid. There's some things that go along with that. Because, there's parts of your world that other people can't understand and will never understand. And so there's things about my ministry life that my BMX friends will never understand, but then there's things about my BMX world and traveling that my ministry friends probably would never
Yeah.
understand. And so I found myself in some really crazy places
Yeah.
thinking, what in the world am I doing here? Both in the Christian world and in BMX world.
Yeah.
But yeah, dude, I love all of it. And I feel like I've finally learned, I'm finally like starting to allow God to let those things overlap a lot more. And I think that's been a lifetime process of figuring out who am I, and God, why did you make me all these ways? And then how are you wanting to use me in all those areas?
I think it's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about this topic. So our topic today is, does the Bible talk about missions? You have this interesting intersection of those three areas you mentioned. Like, I know no one else who is a pastor, a missions guy, and like a professional BMX guy. I'm like, that's the guy I want to talk with about missions, because you're talking about it, you're practicing it in the world. And yeah, I think for 20 plus years, you've been talking, like speaking professionally about missions, which is pretty cool. Like, you got a few of the talks down, like you've done them a lot. So, man, I'm excited to dive in. I got to ask this though, because I feel like this is one thing we got to touch. Oh, where am I going? So, true or false, you have been to every U.S. state?
No.
False. All right, give me a number. So it's not 50, is it 49?
49.
It's 49.
We
got to change that, but
I know,
we need
me
it.
personally, I haven't been to speak in Alaska. We actually just sent a team to Alaska this last semester. For the traveling team, that was the 50th out of 50. My team, our team only went 49 out of the 50.
But you've been to Alaska personally?
I haven't even
Never
been. No, I've gotten close, but
Wow.
the one of the reasons was the campuses are just spread out there and different. I've gotten invitations to go to Alaska to speak at things in like January, and I just said no.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
but yeah, and also I kind of liked the 49 out of 50. I thought it just kind of begged a little curiosity more than saying
Which
50 out of
state?
50.
Yeah.
Yeah, because people always go, "Oh, which one?" Like, "Oh, Kansas."
You've been in Kansas so many
I
times.
should just start saying that. Like,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, we skipped Kansas." 'Cause there's basically nothing there.
So for those who don't know, tell us about Traveling Team and what you've done the last 20 years.
Well, my wife and I both, we weren't thinking about missions. I didn't have a heart for the world. And so it was like God opened our eyes to world missions as college students. And this was the 90s, so it just blew us away, like some of the things we're going to talk about. Like they were brand new to me, and I knew my Bible. I'd been a Christian for a long time. I felt like I knew God, and I just missed this whole part. So we felt like, man, it was such a strategic time in our life to hear about missions, though, because we were just getting married. So we knew, okay, we're marrying around the same idea, same purpose. We were just starting our life, our careers. We were finishing our degrees. Of all the times to catch somebody with this idea, what might shape the rest of their life, we were like, dude, college is like the best time to help people become aware of this. So when we were thinking about what to do, we decided to kind of really leverage our gifts toward mobilization, because we could go be one more missionary overseas, or we could raise up 100 or 1,000. So the traveling team started as a ministry to college students to help them catch a vision for the world before they launch out into their different careers or whatever. And some of them are going to go, some of them are not. But we wanted to kind of just stir a whole generation with this idea that God's heart's for the world. So we started in a minivan.
Do you remember what kind of minivan? Like what?
Ford Windstar.
So this is like early 2000s?
Everybody stopped making minivans. Like about every 5 years, somebody said, no, not anymore. So
we can't do this anymore.
Ford Windstar. And we've had them all. Like, yeah, you want to ask me about, and those were great, dude. They were built well.
We had a
tanks.
Green Ford Windstar growing up. It was a great car.
Ford Windstar. We rented them for like the first couple of years from this company. But anyway, we traveled 6 to 8 months out of the year in a minivan, semester at a time, suitcase and a backpack, going campus to campus.
Like, how many people are in the car?
So, excuse me. So it'd be Rebecca and I, and then like 2 single staff.
Gotcha.
Usually.
And all your suitcases in the back, and you just hit every college
take
campus.
The third seat out. It would all be books and materials in our suitcases, and it It was great. I mean, we started off our marriage like that. Kind of felt
Wait,
like we had
your
kids.
first year of marriage, you were driving in a
We
minivan.
were like 10 months in. Yeah.
Wow. What did her parents say to that? You're like, hey, I'm going to marry your daughter. Then a few months later, you're like, hey, P.S., like, we're just
Yeah.
going to go on a big trip in a
Well,
minivan.
we didn't even, we hadn't decided on the traveling team when we got married. We got married knowing that we wanted to do something in missions.
Mm-hmm.
And then we took the perspectives class, which a lot of people maybe you've heard about, maybe
Yeah.
not. It's a missions class. And it was halfway through that class as my best friend was launching out the traveling team and leaving for the road. Like he started it, Todd Aaron,
Yeah.
and invited us to do it. And we said no at first. I don't know if you knew that.
I didn't know that.
Because I thought it sounded weird. I was like, you're traveling in a van, like Scooby Doo, and
Claude, it is weird.
it is weird. But then we took this class, and he was leaving. It's like one of those. It's like one of those movies where you realize you've missed a moment and you like run to the airport and catch, the plane. It was kind of like, oh my gosh, we're about to miss something that's really great.
Man.
And so halfway through his first year, we said, okay, dude, we changed our mind. We want to do this.
Okay.
So we started the second team that was going around the country.
So Todd was team one, you were team two. You're both cruising around the U.S. separately in minivans, hitting college campuses, talking about missions.
Well, because I think the thinking has always been, the thinking of the day was, man, bring people to a big conference. There was Urbana after the student volunteer movement, which is the greatest missions movement in history. There was the Urbana Missions Conference, which really kept missions alive. Like those two things, 75% of the mission force is probably still today result of those two things.
And Urbana started in what, like the 50s, something like that?
That's me, yeah, 60s, something like that. But they were having 20,000 people come, and that's where like Jim Elliott, Nate Saint, or a lot of those guys got a heart for the world there. But
So Jim Elliott and Nate Saint attended Urbana.
yeah, I met a guy. What was his name? He was with them. They were all from Wheaton together, and they all stood and pledged together.
I didn't know that.
He was at one of the Urbanas I went to. He still had his little card. He pulled it out of his jacket. He's like, here's my card that I signed that night.
The first Urbana was held in 1946 in Toronto.
Campaign. Oh.
Toronto, Canada, 1946.
Yeah, those were the thinking of the day. Have a big conference on missions, invite everybody to come here, and then we'll just slam them with God's heart for the world. We said, you know what? Let's take an evangelistic approach to it. Like, what about the people who, if you don't care about missions, are you going to come to Toronto? Are you going to come to Urbana, Illinois? That's why it's called Urbana. And so we thought, the people who need to hear this are not going to come to a conference. So we kind of need to go to them. Like we need to go fish for them. And so we decided to go campus to campus. It's a lot slower approach, speaking of 50 students at a time, 100 students at a time. But really, when we looked at the end of the year, Urbana was 20,000 people. We spoke to 30,000. And so
in 1 year.
Yeah, so we were kind of saying, man, every year is an Urbana year for us. They're just spread out. And so and
you're hitting the people that probably wouldn't go to Urbana.
We're hitting the people, I think, that love Jesus, just like me. Like they love Jesus, they know their Bible, they love God, they want to obey him, but maybe it just never heard about God's heart for the world, just never seen it in that way. And so we said, man, let's take it to them and open their eyes. Let's do what those conferences can't do, which is go to the people who need to hear it.
Man, that's so good. I love the evangelistic approach to missions, right? There's this guy that I know you've quoted before and talked about before, but A.T. Pearson said, Christians need conversion to missions as much as a sinner needs conversion to Christ.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that real quick? Like, what does that mean to you?
I say that missions is the gospel for Christians. That's basically what A.T. Pearson's saying. Well, a lot of us, like when you trusted Christ, you got saved. That was awesome. Like God saved you. He forgave your sin. We're born out of the world. Some of us, we had all kinds of sin and lost friends and who knows what. And like God rescued us out of a lot of stuff, and sometimes the church is like, okay, yeah, here, you need to leave all that, leave all those people behind, come to us. It takes about 2 years for you to get rid of all your non-Christian friends. And that's kind of our model. But Jesus said, man, Lord, I don't ask you to take them out of the world. I'm actually going to turn around and send them back into the world. And so I think what I think is, man, non-Christians in my life, they need to hear the gospel that Jesus can forgive their sin.
Yeah.
But my Christian friends have gotten so far away from their mission in life in the lost world. It's almost like I need to remind them, man, Jesus didn't just save you to huddle and wait for, heaven. Jesus sends us back into the world with a mission. And that conversion, that decision is just as much as of a lordship kind of decision as when we came to Christ. Like, it's a big decision. Jesus, here's my life. You can do whatever you want with it.
This is like the demon-possessed man, right? So Jesus heals the demon-possessed man, where he like casts the demons into the pigs. They all run off the cliff, right? That was a weird story. And then he's like, Jesus, can I come with you? And he's like, no, I want you to stay. Go back to the people who knew that you were demon-possessed and tell them what I did for you.
Yeah.
Like, is that kind of the heart behind what you're saying? Like, we don't need to just get out of the world. We need to get into the world, and this is the gospel for Christians.
Yeah.
Missions is the gospel for Christians in that way.
It's and it's just obedience,
Yeah.
But I think it's such an eye-opening conversion that it almost takes a second presentation, and it takes someone being straightforward. I mean, it's a like I talked about missions the other day with a group of about 40 pastors and leaders at our church. Great men and women, gifted, brilliant. They know their Bible. They love God. But dude, it split the room. There were people, the question was, what about our mission field here? What about lost people here? Is everybody called to go? Is this just about overseas? Or, and dude, the missions question, even among the godliest people I know, bro, it will divide the room. And I think that's where I was as a college student. I was looking around my campus. I was at a state school. I was like, I know plenty of lost people. I remember Todd invited me to come to a missions conference, and I was like, no, thanks. And he's like, why not? And I was like, well, I'm not a nerd and a weirdo. But second, I was like, I know plenty of lost people right here. Yeah. And I remember him being like, well, what if that's the problem? I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, we're going to talk about people who have nobody like you, people in the world who don't have a Christian friend. Like, and I went to this conference, and it was the first time I realized I learned a new term. Like, I knew that my friends were unsaved. I had never thought about that there were people in the world who were unreached. And that was brand new to me. That's when I realized, oh man, there is a need for people to change their address and go. Like, if everybody's a missionary right where they're at, that's a good thing. Like, we should be missional. We should be trying to reach lost people right where they are. But if nobody ever moves, 5 out of 6, I think this is what David Bryant says, 5 out of 6 non-Christians on planet Earth will never hear the gospel unless Christians change their address, unless somebody comes to them. That's what he says. And so if everybody's missional, that'll be great for reaching your unsaved people, but it will never reach the unreached people.
So the 1 out of 6 will get reached if nobody moves and we're all missional, but the 5 out of 6.
5 out of 6 will never hear if nobody is willing to change either how they give or where they live. Yeah. And so that's what struck my heart is I was like, because it made me angry, honestly. Like, when I was young, I would see, some of my friends at our campus go on these mission trips to Haiti every year. And what made me angry is like, dude, you don't share your faith here. Like, I had a heart to be missional, and I had a heart to reach my campus and reach lost people. So but missions made me angry because I'm like, why are we wasting all this money sending you knuckleheads somewhere when you don't even share your faith here? And you go with your little T-shirt and your backpacks, and you come back and you did missions.
I was like, getting on an airplane.
That's a waste of money. I was like, dude, that costs a lot of money to send you to do something you don't do here. The other, 51 weeks of the year. And that was kind of my mentality. But then I like I said, I realized there are 3.4 billion people. I think that's what it is now. Yeah. That will never hear unless someone goes to him. And so, my friends that are lost here, they're lost because of their choices, but those people are lost because of my choices as a Christian. Does that make sense? Yeah. Like, because I choose to live where it's comfortable. I choose to give where I want to give, live how I want to live. The people who are lost here in our city, they have to drive past 5 churches. They're lost because of their choices for the most part. But the people in India, the people in China who will live and die and never get a chance to hear, that's on me.
All right, so these are shots fired. So I think we need to open the Bible and we need to talk about this because this is
The Bible?
I mean, yeah. What's that? If what you're saying is true, like if 5 out of 6 people will never hear the gospel unless someone changes their address, and that's because of my choices, like that's offensive, right? For me, for others, as we're thinking about this, like you're saying, I need to change something about my life. I don't want to do that, but it's really not you saying this, so to speak, right? It's not people in mission saying this. Like this comes from somewhere, right? And it doesn't just come from our brains and our hearts. Like we're not that good at people, right? Like let's talk about the Bible. Like, does the Bible really talk about missions, or is this just extra biblical? Is this just missions books that some guys and gals have written? Like, does the Bible actually talk about missions?
It does, and but I think that one of the reasons it's sad we have to ask that question is you wouldn't know that from the way missions is presented a lot of times at churches. Like I say, you can either do missions from emotion or certainty, and I think doing missions from emotion looks like the missionary that comes back to your church and shares a story about, man, look at these lives that are changed. Look at these poor people, and shouldn't we feel a certain way? Or, they're going to hell, and won't you give? Won't you do something? And all those things are true. There is people's spiritual, eternity at stake. There's a lot of things to be emotional about in that. But that doing missions from emotion means every year I got to prime the emotion again. Every year I got to come back and like prime the pump. And shouldn't you feel bad? Shouldn't you?
And the emotion really appeals to guilt, right?
It's kind of more guilt. I think that's when people go, oh man, is this, why am I feeling uncomfortable? And okay, I'll just give money and then I won't feel so bad, or I'll go do something small. But you don't get long-term, like core kind of life change from missions from emotion. Missions from certainty, what I mean by that is, let's look at what the Bible, not just commands, but promises. And I think that was a big shift for me, is I'd always seen missions done from a motivation of like emotion, not from like where the Bible gives us certainty. There's things the Bible talks about a lot of things. So to say that this Bible talks about missions, of course you can find something in there. There's things that the Bible teaches clearly, like the commands. There's things that are systematic, like the Trinity. That's not a term in the Bible, but that's something that we get that's systematic that we put together. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then there's things that are both. Like, is Jesus the Messiah, the promised one? That's both. It's both clear in the New Testament, but it's systematically, we see it through the Old and New Testament. And missions is one of those things that's both. And I think you need both. Obviously, there's Matthew 28 where Jesus makes a command. He shouldn't have to command things more than once, but one command should be good enough, right? But he says, go, therefore, all authority has been given to me, therefore go make disciples of all the nations. Christians today call it the Great Commission. He actually repeats that commission in each gospel.
Yes, there's 5 of them, right? Matthew, Mark, 5. Luke, John, Acts.
There's probably 5
probably other places.
Ones. And before his resurrection, Jesus talks about everything: marriage, hell, money. After his resurrection, the seems like the only thing he was talking about was go, you're my witnesses, Jerusalem, Judea, ends of the earth. I mean, that he had one sermon after that.
Yeah, like literally before he ascends into heaven, right? Acts 1:8. Yeah, those are some of his final words.
It's some of his final words, which are important. But that's not all we have. Paul, we'd think of the Apostle Paul, one of the pioneer, premier missionaries of our New Testament. All his missionary journeys. Do you know he never quotes that? Never quotes any of the commissions. That's not his motivation, which I think is interesting, because we kind of try to hang a lot on the Great Commission and the commands. You should obey the commands. That was never Paul's motivation. Do you know what he quotes? Genesis. Like in Galatians 3, he says, this is what God's promised to do through Abraham. That's why he preached the gospel in advance to him, saying, all nations will be blessed. In Acts 13, he quotes Isaiah 49:6. This is what the Lord has commanded us. I will make you a light to the Gentiles, that the nations, your salvation may reach the ends of the earth. And that's a suffering servant passage. Isaiah, it's about Jesus, but he says, no, this is what God's commanded us. So Paul he's linking all this stuff back, not to what is clear with Jesus' words necessarily, but to what's been systematic through the whole Bible, starting in Genesis. And so for anyone listening who doesn't know, he's talking about Genesis 12, verse 1 through 3, where God makes a promise to Abraham. Before that, God created man sinned. God starts over with Noah, tells him, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. Same thing he tells Adam. But after the flood and after the Tower of Babel, you've got people scattered all over the world, all these different languages, at least 70 different language and nation groups. And in the very next chapter, God makes a promise to Abraham. He says, leave your country, your people, your father's household, go to the land I'm going to show you. And it basically says, I'm going to bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you. But through you, Abraham, through you, all the nations of the world will be blessed. And that promise, like you put a pin in that promise, that becomes the thesis statement for everything else God's doing in the rest of the Bible. And things start to point back to that promise. He promises it to Isaac, I'm going to make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and all peoples will be blessed. To Jacob, I'm going to bless all the nations. They'll be like the dust of the earth. 2 more times, to Abraham. Like just in Genesis, God promises it 5 times. And so I think, just to back up for a second, I know Jesus commanded it, okay? And that's a big deal. Like I know Jesus commanded it. That wasn't what got my heart, though. What got my heart was seeing that it was bigger than just a command. It was a promise. And we could talk about how it weaves its way through the whole Old Testament. But when we get to the last book of the Bible, Revelation, what really got me was Revelation 7:9, that there will be people in heaven from every tribe, every tongue, every nation. And to see that whole story arc, not just that God promised it, but that he's going to fulfill it. I was like, dude, I'm all in on this, right? Like I'm all in. Jesus commanded it, but really he's just reminding him this is what the whole storyline is about.
So missions isn't just like the Great Commission. It's not just like one thing that Jesus said one time in Scripture, and we kind of put that next to his teachings in the Sermon on the Mount, like divorce.
Like greet each other with a holy kiss. Do you do that? Do you keep that command?
I didn't kiss you when I saw you today.
know.
You're probably grateful for that.
There's a lot of commands that we just go, yeah, I mean, it's just in there like twice.
Yeah. But you're saying like missions is different. There's a clear, systematic, literal Genesis to Revelation thread that connects all of Scripture.
Have you seen the graphic that's been going around on social media? It's the cross references of the Bible. I saw Jordan Peterson talk about it. Other people, I forgot the guy, Chris something, who created it. It's amazing. You need to go Google and look it up. It's the 63,000 cross references of Scripture, but it's this beautiful, like, looks like just rainbow threads throughout the Old Testament, New Testament. And when you look at that and you see these 63,000 times the Old Testament and New Testament connect, yes.
So that's like visually showing, using color.
This is one book written by 40 people.
Yeah.
Okay, think about what it would take to connect the dots between 40 authors over 1,500 years. And try to write something today that is still true 1,500 years from now, that comes true. 40 different authors, 3 languages, 3 continents. But listen, when I saw that, you know what I thought? Well, 2,000 of those talk about God's heart for the world, for all nations, all languages, all the Gentiles, right? Like that's the thread that connects Old Testament, New Testament. And one of the things it does is it proves that, man, our Bible's true, but it shows that, man, God has been about this for a long time. Like this is the reason we have a Bible. It's not just in the Bible. This is the reason we have one.
So if missions really is in the Bible, and it's not just in Matthew, it's not just in Acts 1:8, but it's in Genesis, it's in Revelation, it's in every book between, because it's one book, right? It's one big book of 40 authors. Who's it for? Like, who is missions actually for then? It's just for the missionary, right? It's just for the, like you mentioned earlier, it's just for the one weird guy who, says, I'm going to go do this thing. Like, who we love, and we're like, but that's not me. Like, who is it actually for?
Well, dude, I had to see this for myself, because I think that even when I first learned about God's heart for the world, and somebody said it's all through the Bible, like I was telling you earlier, like I had to go through the Bible myself, and so like I remember going through with like a red pen. This is a different Bible, but and just marking all the places in Scripture where God talks about His heart for the world. I mean, it's all through the Psalms. And one of the most interesting verses is actually Romans 10, and it says, how can everyone who calls upon the name of the Lord will be saved. How can they hear, or how can they believe unless they've heard? How can they hear without someone preaching? But how can they preach unless they're sent? And, I always thought of missionaries as the people who packed up, went overseas, different culture, learned a different language, all that stuff. We need those people. But according to Romans 10, they're not the only people that are involved in missions. Like, how can they preach unless they're sent? In other words, we need faithful Christians holding the ropes, behind the scenes that are sending them out. I mean, just think about like the military. Think about Top Gun. Like how many people on that cruiser had to work behind the scenes to keep those four fighter jets out there. Like, we need people committed.
But we don't see them in the movie. All we see is Tom Cruise.
Yeah, but like they're there,
there.
and we get a glimpse of them, the little green screen watching what's going on, and I think they're no less committed. You know what I mean? They're paying attention, and they're invested in what's going on in those four guys that they're sending to the front lines, and so we need all Christians to say, man, I'm either in a jet on the front lines headed into the hardest places in the world, or man, I better be glued to the screen. Like, right, I better be in communication with them, praying for them, financially supporting them, sending, what do you need? How can we pray for you? How can we support you? It's that image that you guys do so well, the rope holder. How can I hold the ropes for them while they're out there? And you really need both, which means there's nobody that sits the bench. Like, there's no spectators. It doesn't mean we're all going to go. And I think I've had to say that, and make that clear that not everybody's going to go be a missionary. But if this is what God is doing, we're all called to play some part. How can they preach unless they're sent? So it means I got to figure out which side of the table do I need to be on, the goer or the sender side. But there is no spectator bench.
Yeah, we've started to say there's 4 roles that any Christian can play in missions. Go there, go here.
You doubled the Bible. Is that what you did?
What would we say? Double the Bible. One up the Bible. Yeah, go there, go here, send by praying, send by giving. Yeah, it's go and send, right? Just broken down even further. Like, go there as a missionary, yes. If God's telling you to do that, do it. And we need more people to do that. Go here, right? And it doesn't just mean, being a quote unquote.
Came from us, yeah.
It probably did come from you guys. Yeah. And
because God's brought internationals right to us. That's what you're talking about.
It's not just being, quote unquote missionary to your neighbors. Like, it may be like witness to your neighbors, love your neighbors, but like go a little further across your city and minister to internationals, immigrants, refugees that are literally coming here. They're coming 99% of the way, never heard the gospel. They'll probably never be invited into an American home. Like, minister to them. So go there, go here, send by praying, send by giving. So there's not just like one role that we can play in missions. There's multiple.
But see, you almost have a new set. You have a new lens you see the world through. So that when you go to your grocery store, you're noticing Afghani people. Like, you're noticing people from Nigeria. Like, you're noticing the cross-cultural opportunity right in front of you in a different way because God's like awaken your heart, to
Okay,
this.
so if it's that obvious though, like if missions, if missions is that obvious in the Bible, like why do so many people miss it? Can we talk about that? Like, so you're talking about this, connection, all these cross references, this Jordan Peterson imagery, where like
Yeah.
all the Bible connects. If it's that obvious, why do not just people, but Christians? Why do so many Christians who actually read their Bibles miss
Well,
missions?
that's part of it is I'm not sure people read their Bibles,
Uh-huh.
but
But what if they
assuming
did?
they did,
Let's assume they did. How could someone
well,
miss it?
you got to remember that Paul said this is a mystery, and so it's there, but you also got to remember there was part of it that was a mystery, and it didn't become really clear until the New Testament. It didn't really become clear until Jesus. And Paul says that this is a mystery. It was hidden in Galatians, 3. It was hidden from the ages before. So even though God was trying to give them glimpses of his heart for Rahab or his heart for the Gentiles or Egyptians that come with them when they're, during the Exodus, many Egyptians punted their gods and came with them. And so they had to say, how do we care for the foreigner who's among us, the international who's among us? So all through the Old Testament, you're seeing it. Solomon dedicates the temple. It says, when the Gentiles, the nations come here and pray, Lord, answer their prayers. This will be a house of prayer for all nations. That's what Jesus, quotes. It was there, but there's part of it, I think, that was meant to be mysterious, just like the parables. But now looking back, have you ever had someone, you go outside and you look up at the stars and someone points out the Big Dipper for the first time?
It's literally the only constellation I know.
It's the only one I
It's
know.
the only
Yeah. But you could probably find it, here in Northern Hemisphere. You could probably find it. And it's actually pretty helpful because that's how you find the North Star. So if you ever get lost, you need the Big Dipper.
Yeah.
But once someone points it out, now you kind of go, oh, there it is. But before that, it was just a bunch of dots. And I think I've read my Bible many times, and I've just kind of skimmed past words like nations, skimmed past words like all the Gentiles or the languages, But in these stories, where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or Daniel, Daniel in the lion's den, when he gets out of the lion's den, King Darius writes a letter, but it says to men of all languages and nations. And you start to go, oh, there it is again. And you start to connect these dots that were there, but I think were a mystery until Jesus showed up and you start to see his miracles. 2/3 of them are done toward Gentiles, which kind of offended probably the Jewish disciples and people that he was hanging out with. They were pretty rattled by the places he went and the people he healed. It's one of the things that made people so angry. His first sermon, Luke 4, where he opens the scroll and says, man, there were many Jewish widows, but God didn't care. He went to the Gentile, made people furious. Like, you talk about splitting the room. They tried to throw him off a cliff for that. And so he unveiled a mystery that God from the beginning has promised that Jesus, Simeon at his dedication, the hope of the Gentiles is here. And so it was an unveiling of a mystery. So I think at some part when we read, sometimes we miss it because of that. I think someone needs to kind of open our eyes. But once you see it, it really is like the Big Dipper. That's why I had to go back myself and read through the whole Bible again.
Yeah, you walked in here with a Bible that had like 4 pins like strapped to the front. Like those are your colors. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first time I did it, I looked for all the places God blesses us, and then all the places we're supposed to be a blessing to the world. And one of the best summaries of this whole idea in the Bible, in my opinion, is Psalm 67. It's verse 1 and 2. May God be gracious to us and bless us, cause his face to shine upon us.
And then it stops right there, right?
No. So that your ways may be known on the earth, your salvation among all nations. And it's this idea that God has blessed us, but not just for us. Like, he's shown his grace to us, but not just for us. So that, in other words, you're a conduit, you're a relay runner with this blessing, that it might go to all the nations. And so I had to just see it for myself, because I'd been a Christian for so long. I'd read my Bible. I went to Dallas Theological Seminary, And none of those things really helped me, like someone walking me through it. But once I saw it, you can't unsee it.
Man, that is so powerful. That'd be interesting to like read through your Bible and underline all the so that's, right? There's so many of
I mean,
them.
that's basically what I did. Is every time God blessed His people, but there was a missional responsibility
So that.
attached to the blessing, and it's
Yeah.
almost every book of the Bible but Job.
Wow. Man, I have a so that story. So, man, my family, we moved from Washington State to California when I was in fourth grade. And man, honestly, I was a little bit of a loser. Like I was not a cool kid. I was not one of those like cool kids. Yeah, not cool. Yeah, shocker, right? And I remember fourth grade, like I was wearing these Nikes, which I think we bought because we were like actually a little bit poor, and so those were probably like 3 years ago Nikes. And this girl in fourth grade, she made fun of me, and she told me that my Nikes were not cool or whatever. And so I was like a little bit insecure as a kid, and I got a lot of affirmation and good teaching from church. Like I remember, I still know my Sunday school teacher from fourth grade. She was awesome. But I remember like these stories. You know, you throw like remember the felt boards in church,
Oh yeah.
right? So teachers would share these stories with felt boards, and I had a lot of those from my childhood, even before that. But I had this one teacher that helped us understand something different, right? So I specifically remember this David and Goliath story, right? And you've heard the story before a million times, like David is going to kill Goliath. But what's interesting, and I have it right here, what's interesting is that David tells Goliath that he's going to kill him, which, by the way, like as a kid, is the coolest thing, right? So this is 1 Samuel 17:46. David is talking to Goliath. You know, all his older brothers are scared of this big giant. And David says, "This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head." Like, that is so cool. Like, that is what all these Marvel movies today are made of, right? It's like the little guy who's the hero who does work on the giant.
That's some Hebrew trash talking.
Yeah, it's major Hebrew trash. That's Old Testament right there. And I think for so long I misread this because like my application was, well, I'm going to slay the metaphorical giants of my life. And I hear, you know, well-meaning Bible teachers give applications like that. Like, hey, we need to go defeat the giants in our life. But in fourth grade, I had a teacher that said, actually, that's not what this is about. She said, keep reading, right? So this day, the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the hosts of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. That's actually one of my favorite missions verses. Like, wait, missions didn't start until Matthew 28. It's like, well, it was in 1 Samuel. And I think, so we're talking about, you know, how do people miss it? I think the reason that I missed it for so long, I call them me goggles. Like, I was wearing these me goggles. Like, you know, every day you wake up, you take a shower, you put on your clothes, you know, you gargle with Listerine, whatever. And then like you throw on these me goggles, and they're actually not goggles. They're mirrors. There's like tiny little mirrors in there. So everything you see, like every passage of scripture you read, it's all about you. It's like, oh, I read that. It's like, oh, that's about me. That's about how I can slay giants. That's about how this book can help my life. And the Bible is going to help your life. But it's also going to make your life really hard. And the Bible and this story specifically is not just about David being a hero. He was, you know, people like David because of that. But David even knew, Goliath, this isn't just about me cutting off your head. It's so that all the earth may know there's a God in Israel. Do you think it's possible that we miss that because we're wearing the me goggles that have little mirrors in them? Like everything we see, we're filtering through the lens of how can this be more about me?
So you're saying maybe we see some things, but we don't actually want to deal with them and obey them.
Yeah, I skipped over the second part of that verse. I didn't want to see it. This isn't about the world. This is about me.
Yeah.
I want to be a giant killer.
Yeah.
You know, I want to be a hero.
Yeah. You asked me, you know, who this was for, and I think that somewhere in our brain we think, you know what, that's important. Somebody should do that. It's in the Bible. It's urgent, right? It's eternal. But who's actually going to go do it? And we sort of think, well, not the A team. but maybe some B team people can go. And some of the people we talked about who visit your church might reinforce that idea. And I remember,
they can go.
I remember, as we were traveling the country, something would happen when we would speak at like Cornell, like we spoke at Stanford, Yale, Duke.
Why they let you in?
Well, there were Christian, meetings there, Campus Crusade, Navigators. So they're believers.
And the people who are there, they probably really want to be there.
They love Jesus. Like they're defending their faith. Like they're in the middle of, the elite schools, Williams College, Carnegie Mellon, like MIT, like we spoke at all those schools to Christians at all the schools. But I would always get this phone call like a week before we came. And the campus minister or somebody would, real kind of coy, indirect way of saying, hey, before you come, I know you're going to challenge our students to do missions, but just want you to keep in mind, like these are like the elite, like these are leaders. They're going to go out and, change things in America. They're going to have an influence here. And it was kind of this, like, I started to get actually kind of annoyed. It made me a little angry, because I thought, like, is that, does Jesus really care what letters are on your sweatshirt? Is that who he's calling? Because, Jesus, like when he calls apostles, he's not just calling fishermen, right? Like he's calling a very wealthy, influential tax collector. Like he's got, later Luke, doctor, right? He's calling a rich young ruler who says no, but he's inviting those people. He doesn't just invite like a one class of people who have nothing else better to do with their life. And so I think that part of us, we think, man, that's good, but it's for somebody else. And I think that kind of mentality, even in churches, is we don't want to send our best people sometimes. I've been challenging our church and our pastors and our leaders, like, are you really willing to mobilize, disciple, but then send our best people? Like, do we want to send our best people? There are some ministries that function like they've created a culture like that. We have friends in a ministry in the South that they send people to India, and in their ministry, they've created such momentum and honor around this idea of going as a missionary to India that they turn away like hundreds of students every summer and turn away dozens every year, like for long term. And because it's like they're sending their best people. And they've created this culture that it is such a privilege to get to go and be on one of those teams and be a part of that. But I think that's rare, like in the rest of the church. I think we've kind of, we've allowed some of our people, to go who maybe aren't even equipped, to go. So I would just say, man, going back to that, even who Jesus calls doesn't have those parameters on it.
So, man, if someone's like, okay, I get it, missions is in the Bible, it's for me, I'm a Christian, but I'm still good. Like, I understand what you're saying intellectually, but I'm just going to do my thing over here. Like, what is the big deal if someone is a Christian and they don't get involved in missions? I'm not saying a missionary. I'm not saying what happens if someone doesn't become a missionary. I'm saying, what if someone is a Christian and they decide, actually, I'm just going to kind of float by, like I'm on a river, just a little river float. I'm going to float by instead of getting in and swimming. Like, what are they missing out on?
Yeah, man, go for it. God is not in heaven, like wringing his hands, hoping that, oh man, I hope Frank will choose to do this, because it's all it's all going to fall apart unless Frank, gets on board. Jesus doesn't seem to worry about that. It amazes me, when we look at John 6, where he's got a lot of people following him, like 70 plus were there and probably a lot of others. And he starts throwing out, hey, you want to follow me, you're going to have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. He's like, you're just here for the food that you saw, And people go, dude, this is a hard teaching. And he's like, yeah, are you offended by me? And many of them, it says most of them turn away and no longer followed him after that. And you know what Jesus does?
He chased him.
No, he propped the door open He basically opened the door, kicked down the little kickstand, and looked at the apostles. He was like, are you offended at me? Do you want to leave also? And I started reading that and going, well, man, who needs who here? You know, maybe Jesus doesn't need me for this mission. Maybe I actually need him, because I look around at the other things I can give my life to in this world, and they're just not going to satisfy you. You know, I mean, look at pick a career and find somebody at the top of it and just go, are they happy? Right? Like our richest people in the world, are they happy?
Yeah, is Justin Bieber happy?
Our most successful athletes in the world, how many gold medals you got to get? Right? Like
Just one more.
You know, Michael Phelps has got, what is it, like 12, 13, 14 gold medals. And he's like poster child for depression and counseling and, recovery. Praise God. But he's saying, dude, it's not there. Tom Brady, right? Like, how many fingers has he got to put rings on? And he's one of the main ones going, dude, is this it? Is this all there is?
He's like 45 and he's got to have another one.
So I would tell Frank, you better take a look at your heroes. You know what I'm saying? Like, you need to take a look at where you're headed. And if you can find something bigger and better to give your life to, go for it. But I don't think you can. And I think you're going to be miserable. Because even if you win, you're not happy. Right? Like, that's, we all think, oh man, I'm not happy because I just haven't achieved enough, or I haven't got enough money, I haven't got the promotion, I haven't won enough gold medals. Even if you win, those guys aren't happy. And so I think we got to ask, well, man, who needs who in this mission? Because Jesus is not, wringing his hands hoping that you realize, man, he needs you. I think the reality is, man, we're bored out of our mind. I think we're restless. We're like Bilbo Baggins. Man, we're comfortable. We're safe. We're in the Shire, but you're bored out of your mind. And you're restless for something big to do that's maybe dangerous and maybe a little edgy. And I think that's why we have so many people who are anxious, depressed, and worse, is because they've come to the end of it. And they go, man, this is not it. And that's why everybody needs like an emotional support, peacock. Next time you're on a plane and there's an emotional support, animal or whatever next to you.
Armadillo.
It's because you need something outside of yourself. Like, your personal happiness, your personal comfort is not enough. And God is saying, man, you're wired to care about something outside of you. Like, you're wired deep down in your heart to have a mission that's outside of you. It's what you're made for. And so I would say, dude, yeah, go do whatever you want to do. But you're not going to find purpose there. You're not going to find significance, and you're not going to find joy.
Can you tell the story of baptizing your son? I feel like that fits so well here, and it's one of my favorites that you tell.
Where he asked me, like, what, it was Easter. Because he was, our kids went through this phase when they were young, when they were like fascinated with heaven. And, you want your kids to believe in heaven.
No.
The only problem is they wanted to go there like right now. And kids are, they're already waking up every day trying to like figure out what the electrical socket does, and, I'm like, I don't, need them wanting to go to heaven right now. And whenever Aiden, he trusted Christ, and like a year later he was getting baptized, and it was on Easter Sunday. And it was just, it's like really special. But still, he had this mentality like, Dad, what if you baptize me and just hold me under and I just drown and I went to heaven on Easter? Wouldn't that'd be amazing, wouldn't it? And so I had to sit both the boys down and be like, boys, you need to try to stay alive. Dad's going to bring you up out of the water. Okay, there's a reason why when we baptize people, we bring them up out of the water, and that's because God's left you here with something to do. And I said, all those people around the world that we talk about, they've never heard of Jesus yet. They're like, yeah. It's like, if every Christian just went straight to heaven, who would be left to tell the world? And they were like, mind blown. But that's, again, John 3:16. For God so loved the world, that's why he gave his son. Like, that's why he loved the world. And a lot of times what we do, we're taught when you become a Christian, just put your name in there. For God so loved Luke. He sent his son. And is that true? Yeah. And so you put your name in there and you become a Christian. But the second gospel, like the missions gospel, is when you learn to take your name back out and put the world back in. Is that God didn't just love you and me, God loved the world. Like that's why he saved you, because he's on this global mission, and that's where you fit. That's where your life makes the most sense.
That's so good. I remember, man, I was a freshman in college, and I literally wrote down I'm a big goal setter, so I literally wrote down a goal, and it was to be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Like I didn't even know.
I saw your strengths, and one of them's future.
Oh yeah.
So I can see this one.
Yeah, and like if I knew what that meant, I probably wouldn't have written it. Most CEOs are probably not super happy, but yeah, there's nothing wrong with being a leader, being a CEO, being in charge, or even making a lot of money. But I think the problem for me was that you're talking about things outside yourself. Man, the motivation for me was just to be really powerful and really rich. Like that's really what was driving the affections of my heart. And yeah, on the surface it sounded nice, but deep down it's like this wasn't in alignment with God's mission for me. And man, I remember it's probably 2.5 years later, I took this trip to India for a couple months, and I knew about missions, and I'd read some of the verses, and my fourth grade teacher, right, she told me the real David and Goliath story. So I'd heard this stuff, but man, I remember when this Indian man in this Hindu temple bowed down to and worship a stone that he thought was a god, but I was convinced wasn't. And this stone couldn't do anything for him. It's like that previous ambition of mine to like be really powerful, it just seemed really small. Like, man, that's it. Like that's the biggest I can dream. I'm over here, wanting to make a lot of money and be powerful and be rich in this life. And look at this guy here. Like, what benefit is it to me if I'm very rich materially in this life and he's very poor spiritually? Because the material stuff, that'll go away. But this spiritual stuff for him is going to last forever. And I felt like I'd always sensed this duty as a Christian, right? Like I have to do this. Like, all right, I guess I got to do missions. All right, I guess I got to share my faith. I got to. And by the way, I think that's true. I think as a follower of Christ, you have to do these things, right? Like Luke 6:46, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I tell you? Like I have to do this. And I felt that deeply. I'm a very duty-oriented person. But I feel like in that moment, for the first time, once I saw this vision of this guy's eternal reality, and that he was not going to enter an eternity apart from God unless, one of the 5 of 6 people changed their address. I'm like, oh, I actually get to play a part in this. Like there's a mission for me to be on, and it's duty. Yes, I have to do this. I've been given orders as a slave to Christ, but also there's a delight. Like I get to do this, and this is so much cooler, more significant, more awesome, eternally beautiful than making a little bit of money. Again, nothing wrong with making money. A lot of my friends who give money to missions, I'm like, I hope you make more money, you can give it to missions, right?
Just tithe and give to the GoFundMe.
Yeah, right. But man, like once the duty and the delight married for me, it was like, I don't just have to do this, which I do, but I get to do this, and I get to be on mission for him instead of creating this tiny little mission for me that doesn't really matter all that much.
Well, I think a lot of Christians are wondering, like, why am I not growing? Like, why I don't have any motivation to read my Bible. I don't have any motivation to pray. I don't feel like I'm becoming any closer to God, any more holy. And I've been thinking a lot about, like, what is it that made me want to grow, and what makes me want to read my Bible? Like, what makes me want to be closer to God? And people don't dream about growth. They dream about a vision. Dude, I was watching this documentary. It's like behind the scenes for Marvel. And afterward, I was like, I don't believe this. Like, I had to go Google it, and I had 2 pictures on my phone. I was showing all my friends. For like the last couple of months, I've been showing these pictures. One is this guy. He's like 6'3", looks like a high school basketball player. And I'm like, do you know who this is? And people are like, I have no idea. And I'm like, you know who it is. You just don't recognize it. And so I flipped to the next picture, and they're like, no way. They'll be like, go back. Because they don't recognize him. And I was watching this documentary, and it's the director talking about going to Australia and finding Chris Hemsworth. And when they cast him, do you know who that is?
Oh yeah, yeah. I know who he is because like all the teenage girls think he's hot.
Oh yeah, you see that second picture. So if you don't,
I mean,
know,
he's a very good looking man. I can't deny.
this is Thor.
Yeah.
But the director found him when he looked like the high school basketball player. And he said, we found the person, and this is what he said that caught my attention. He goes, he had the framework that we could make him into Thor. But he was cast in the role a year before. And so for the next year, he's got a personal trainer. For the next year, he's eating 8 meals a day, high protein. He puts on like 35 pounds of muscle. Like everybody talks about his workout, like what it took to make him into Thor. Before that, dude, he was working at a pharmacy cleaning like breast pumps with a toothbrush. Like he was running out of money. Nobody heard of him. This was his like
Scrawny. Just a scrawny guy.
But you know what? He's like, this is my invitation.
Man.
Like this is who. Why would I say no to this? I just think it's one of the most beautiful pictures that God invites us to be fishers of men before we're ready. Jesus says, I will make you, right? Like he knows that you're not where you need to be today, but he invites you to follow him. He says, man, I'll make you who you need to be, but you say yes and follow me first. And I think one of the reasons Christians are so stuck in their spiritual life and they're so stuck in their growth is they haven't said yes to a big enough mission. They haven't said yes to like a big enough vision. People don't dream about growth. They dream about winning. They dream about the championship. Like they dream about a mission, and then growth follows vision. He had to grow into Thor, but he got the role. He was cast when he was just like you and me. Yeah. And I think one of the reasons, if you're listening and you go, why should I do this? Is because growth is reverse kind of engineered. We catch a vision first. We say, man, God, that's what I want to be a part of, but I know I'm not ready yet. And then we go into our Bible. Then we go into prayer with you. Then we get close to God because we see this is what he's called us to. But we do the following. He does the making. Like it's a promise. He will make us into who he needs us to be. But when you don't have that kind of motivation, I think you will spend your Christian life scrawny.
Man, this is so good. Thanks for being with us. I don't want to finish without talking about ways people can connect with you. So you've written 3 books. You run a ministry. How can people stay in touch with what you're doing?
Oh, man. Our ministry is called The Traveling Team. So it's just thetravelingteam.org. It's a great place to find mission statistics, articles, questions you might have, missions history. I would just point people to there. I'm not really like a social media guy and all that stuff,
but thetravelingteam.org/statistics, I think it is /stats. Man, that's become like a resource in the missions world. Like everyone goes there to get their stats.
I know I can't find any stats anymore because it just like leads back to my website.
Yeah, you're the source. You're the source. And you also wrote a couple great books. If people picked up one book by you, which one should they pick up?
Oh, well, Live Life on Purpose was the first one I wrote, and a lot of what we're talking about today is probably captured in that book.
Yeah, that's a great one. Man, thanks for being with us. This is fun.
Yeah, dude. Always.